Hello and welcome to Liberty News, the news publication that delivers facts, not an agenda. Last week, Joe Biden was inaugurated into office, and to say it was unusual would be an understatement. From Donald Trump not attending the ceremony to the National Guard remaining in Washington, D.C. until mid-March, the events of last week have already set course to outpace 2020 in being the strangest year in recent memory. When Joe Biden was arriving at the White House, he and his wife, Jill Biden, were not greeted by the chief usher to welcome them into the White House, as he had been fired half an hour before Biden's arrival. It is customary for the new first family to be greeted by the chief usher into the White House after inauguration. However, it is unusual for the chief usher to have such a short tenure as Timothy Harleth. Different sources will differ in count, but generally speaking, there have been between 9 to 11 chief ushers since its official inception in 1897, or roughly speaking, one usher per 2.5 presidents. The only other chief usher to serve one president was Raymond Murr for Franklin Roosevelt in 1933, or almost 90 years ago. The dismissal of Timothy Harleth is surprising, resulting in him being the shortest-serving chief usher in history. However, again, sources will not agree on the reason for his dismissal. It is unclear if it was the new Biden administration's decision to have Harleth fired at their request before entering the White House, or if the Trump administration was leaving a final insult to Joe Biden. Aside from who was to blame for the dismissal of the chief usher, one promise Biden made on his campaign trail was for the U.S. to re-enter the Paris Accord, which he did as an executive order on his first day as president. The United States is now back in the Paris Accord, which has ruffled some feathers amongst Republican congresspeople. Lauren Boebert, Chip Roy, and Ted Cruz have all expressed their frustration about the Biden administration rejoining the Paris Agreement, with Chip Roy also displeased with the executive order rejoining the Accord and the WHO. The main concern voiced by Boebert and Cruz is that they are joining a host of other countries in helping lower the emissions in Paris, not the globe as a whole as expressed in these tweets. They have only slightly missed the mark as to what the Paris Agreement means, a tad embarrassing when you're in a position of power. Boebert is actively trying to push a bill to block Biden from entering the Paris Agreement until there's a resolution from the Senate, while Roy wants to push legislation that would block taxpayer money from going towards both the Paris Accord and the WHO. Although it has only been these politicians who have voiced their concern loud enough to make headlines in the past week about the past executive orders, it still may be a challenge for Biden's desired legislation to pass with the upset Republicans. The Republican Party's main concern is that it will cost the jobs of American people and will be detrimental for businesses, although, according to the Energy Future Initiative, the energy efficiency sector has created over 50,000 new jobs compared to the oil and gas industry's 18,000 new jobs. The most likely scenario that will play out is that Democrats will do what Republicans did when Trump withdrew from the Paris Accord and ignore their concerns. With Biden re-entering the Paris Accord, one of the first things he did as president is stopping the Keystone XL pipeline from being built. The pipeline has been at the center of controversy in not only American politics, but in Canadian politics too. The project was to help the Canadian government sell Canadian crude oil to the US from the Alberta oil sands all the way down to the US Gulf Coast. The controversy in Canada came from the issues existing from the other pipeline, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and the effects it would not only have on the ecosystem of the Rockies, but also the indigenous people living in the path of the pipeline. The fear of the XL pipeline going ahead with construction was the same as the Trans Mountain Pipeline and the treaties with the indigenous people not being honored. Similar incidents happened with the Rock Sioux tribe and the Dakota Access Pipeline back in 2016 when oil spilled over their reserve land. With the Biden administration canceling the construction of the pipeline, it is a win for his administration and a loss for the oil and gas sector and for the Canadian government. Outside of North America, there have been massive protests in Russia over the arrest of opposition leader Alexei Navalny when he returned to Russia from Germany after recovering from an assassination attempt almost half a year ago. Alexei is the main face and critic of the Kremlin, being a pro-democracy and anti-corruption politician, both things that are very prevalent in Eastern Europe. After Alexei touched down in Moscow on Sunday and was subsequently arrested, his team uploaded a video to YouTube exposing the alleged nearly $1.5 billion palace on the coast of the Black Sea, stating it was taxpayer-funded for the leisure of Vladimir Putin. The video has garnered over 89 million views at the current time of writing this. Vladimir Putin has denied that the palace was his and how it was constructed, leaving more questions than answers from the Kremlin, as is usually the case. On top of an expose for stealing taxpayer money, there are now allegations that Putin has a love child with a former mistress in the wave of the outrage of the Navalny arrest. How credible is this story? Not the most credible, as it isn't as damning as $1 billion palace. However, it is still a funny and intriguing story in the secretive life of Vladimir Putin. During the protests, there were roughly speaking 50,000 protesters in Moscow alone, with 1,600 people being arrested, including Navalny's wife Yulia Navalnaya. The Russian authorities say that only a small group of 4,000 people attended the protests, while Reuters reports that the number was closer to 50,000. It's not easy to get accurate numbers on such events when internal sources are not honest about such events occurring in the first place, muddying the waters for outside sources, only digging the hole of corruption deeper. In China news, Jack Ma is not yet dead. After many long months since his disappearance in October, Ma made his first public appearance on state-run television addressing rural Chinese teachers. His disappearance had many people worried, as he was one of the most well-known philanthropists in the world, and for him to have vanished off the face of the world so suddenly was troublesome. For those unaware, Jack Ma is the founder of Alibaba, the Amazon of China, if you will. Ant Group, the affiliate company to Alibaba and also founded by Jack Ma, is the largest financial tech company in China, and when Jack Ma said that regulators were too conservative and that they were stifling innovation for the Chinese economy, they blocked the IPO for Ant Group, which was supposed to be the largest IPO in Chinese history. It was a blatant flex of the power of Chinese authorities, one which Xi Jinping is not afraid of showing off. Jack Ma is not the only billionaire or influential figure to have disappeared at the hands of Chinese authorities. Here, a video by Jake Tran gives a brief insight to the other Chinese tycoons who have disappeared or suffered a worse fate than Jack Ma. Another blatant flex of Chinese power happened when China, yet again, flew bomber planes near Taiwan. For those also unfamiliar, there has been a very heated dispute over the sovereignty of Taiwan since the Cold War. During the Chinese Civil War, which saw the rise of the CCP and domination of mainland China, the Republic of China has taken refuge in Taiwan. This has sparked a very heated debate which China is the real China. Is it the ones who won the Chinese Civil War, or is it the government who fled back and took refuge on the then Chinese island? This has created trouble in the South China Sea and created tension over UN recognition and voting rights. With Beijing's ultimate desire to stop Taiwan from claiming independence and sovereignty, Beijing has been threatening Taiwan with Chinese Air Force flybys into Taiwan's airspace. These flybys then force the Taiwanese Air Force to respond in case that a Chinese attack really were to happen, slowly depleting Taiwanese Army and Air Force resources. In the most recent event of this occurring, mentioned at the beginning of this segment, was China flying with a handful of bomber planes. This was a test for the new Biden administration to see how they would react, and react they did. The US government sent out the USS Roosevelt to lead a strike group to Taiwan in case China did decide to launch an attack on Taiwan, showing to the world the US is going to be committed to protecting Taiwanese sovereignty under Biden, as was Trump. Our final story is about Australia and Google. Google has threatened to leave Australia over the new proposed legislation that, and I quote, would force tech giants to pay local media companies for providing their content in search and sharing their content on social media, end quote. Or in simple words, Google and other tech giants would have to pay local news outlets for linking to their content in their search engines. The worry, which was pointed out on the WAN show, is that many news outlets have been going bankrupt or going under, which may result in a less diverse pool of opinions and perspectives. With fewer media outlets to report on matters, it creates room for companies like Google and Facebook to promote biased or fake news with limited other views. Google states that this new code will be unmanageable and will force the company out of Australia, affecting the entire population. Google and Facebook have been on the receiving end of backlash for what kind of links, articles, and content they have promoted before, but like it was stated on the WAN show, Australia is the first country to actively step up to big tech companies and not being bullied by these conglomerates to continue their sketchy business tactics. The legislation is still yet to pass, and it is still up in the air if Google will continue to remain in Australia or if the legislation will fall through. If this code does pass, it will be interesting to watch and see how this will play out and whether or not other countries will come together and pass similar legislation against big tech. This is all for this week's news. Thank you for watching this video, and I appreciate that you watched an unbiased take on today's news. Links are in the description for every source used. Until next week, this has been Liberty News.